up, guys? It's your boy Matt back again on WeldTube here at South Coast Welding Academy in Houston, Texas. Got a special guest today, Mr. Riley Reed, Amish Mafia Fab Works on Instagram. He's gonna be showing us how to do a 6-inch Schedule 80 freehand pipe, TIG all the way out. So stay tuned, we're gonna learn a few things today, guys.
Hey guys, my name's Riley Reed, or Amish Mafia Fab Works on Instagram. I'm a welding instructor at Northeast Tech in Pryor, Oklahoma, and a former tube welder. Today I'm going to go through a little bit of what I used to do in the field, which was piece rate welding, which meant I got paid by the weld. So, speed was king. Today I'm going to show you what I think is the quickest way to weld out a 6-inch Schedule 80 carbon steel pipe. So what I got here is a little 6-inch Schedule 80 pipe. The way that I always used to fit these up is with a feathered edge, which means no root face, and just a little bit of a daylight of a gap, so a little less than 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put my root in. I'm going to put my root in at about 180 amps. That's going to help me liquefy the edges of the bevel and get a good amount of penetration. All right guys, so I'm just going to show you a little bit of a dry run of my technique right now. I'm going to start here at 3 o'clock on the pipe and work my way up to 12 o'clock. So all I'm basically doing is I'm holding the torch with these 2 fingers right here and laying the rest of the torch handle in my palm. I'm going to lay these 3 fingers on the sidewall of the pipe, and I'm basically just going to lay the cup down in the groove. Once I lay it in the groove, I'll have my wire with the keyhole closed, and I'm just going to push wire as I move along. And all I'm doing is just pushing the cup with about 30 degrees of lean back on the torch, and I'm just going to push this torch all the way up through here. So when I first initiate the arc, I'm coming right up on the edge of that tie-in. I'm going to make sure I liquefy that before I introduce the wire back into the puddle. Then once I'm down here in the bevel, really all I'm feeling is I'm trying to feel the wire fall down into the puddle. With this small of a gap, there's a little bit of a worry with, well, is the root going to go in or not? Well, if I've got good enough feel with the ends of my fingers, I can really feel that wire. I can feel it falling down into that puddle. Another thing, and you guys will see it here in a little bit, there's going to be a little bit of a line running down the center of the root. That also kind of tells me that that thing's going in. And as I'm welding, I can see that line developing right in the center of the weld. So that's really telling me right there that that root's going in really good. I'm not keeping a ton of pressure on the wire, but when I do feel it kind of stop up, I will slow my travel speed just a hair to make sure that the root continues to go in. Now when I come up here to the top, I'm going to tie into the back side of this tack. I'm going to pull my wire out, and I'm just going to kind of dab it in there just a little bit, make sure I know that it went in. Then I'm going to come up the side of the bevel, terminate the arc. Bevel, terminate the arc. That's a quarter of the pipe done right there. Did a little bit slower just for demonstration purposes. Doing this in the field though, I'm really going to rip this thing in there, guys. I'm going to move right along, and I'm going to try to get this root in here as fast as I can get it in. It's going in really nicely. I'm coming up to a bigger spot in the gap. I've already looked at the pipe, so I know that it's going to get bigger. So I'm going to increase my travel speed. The reason I'm going to increase my travel speed is gravity's starting to work against me now, and it's going to try to pull my weld to the inside of the pipe. So I got to make sure that I'm clipping along good enough moving forward, especially at 190 amps, to make sure that I don't get a hemorrhoid on the inside of this pipe. Keyhole opened up just a hair there. If the keyhole opens up, don't freak out. Just push more wire into the keyhole and continue to move forward, and it'll close. Coming back up to a tack. Once again, I'm warming the edge of the tack up, dabbing a little bit of wire in there, moving forward. And then always remember, guys, don't stop right in the middle of the weld. Always come up the side of the bevel. Reason I like to come up the side of the bevel, especially running this much heat, if I'm to terminate the arc right where I want to stop, I'm going to end up with a crater. And that crater, it's not just on the surface. That crater is going to go all the way through that weld. So I always want to make sure that I come up off the side of the bevel and terminate my arc. That lets that puddle cool down slowly and keeps the top of that from cratering. And you can even cause a crack up there at the top if you're not careful. Ooh, feel a little bit of magnetism in this pipe. If you're ever welding and you feel your wire sticking to one bevel or the other, always make sure you stop and check it out. If you have one side of the bevel magnetized over the other, you could actually have a lopsided root in there, and you could be breaking one wall down but not the other. When you're using lift arc, you don't have the luxury of a foot pedal to slowly taper out of the arc, so that's why we come up the side of the bevel. Another thing that I really like to do, especially using this much heat, is to make sure that I saturate the weld with as much gas as possible. So after I pull up out of this weld, I'm always going to come back. I'm going to saturate the end of the tie-in right there with a little bit of argon, just to make sure that we don't cause any weld defects that we could have easily avoided. I went ahead and let that keyhole a little bit. That gap is getting really tight because I've put a lot of heat on this thing. These two pieces of metal are pulling together really quickly. So I'm making sure that I feel this out, because most of the time in the field when you're doing this, you're not going to be able to see whether the root's going in or not. So if you come up to a tight spot, you really want to be vigilant and make sure that the root is going in. So when I come to a stop here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to walk the cup in the bevel just a little bit, and I'm just going to put a little pad right here to end my root bead. Alright guys, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a hot pass in this thing, but really what I mean by that is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flush this thing out. So we're going to go straight from root to flush, or close to flush on this. And then we're going to let this thing cool off real good, and I'm going to put a 1 bead cap on it. So one thing you guys are going to see me do is, as I'm coming up this thing, I'm going to be feeding wire in from one side real strong. I'm going to pull the wire out of the puddle, and I'm going to wash the puddle down into the bottom of the bevel to make sure that I'm tying in all the way down inside of the groove. That's the key to carrying a lot of metal. Is taking short steps, adding a lot of material, and making sure you wash that material down into the bevel. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up. I got some 1/8 inch 70S6 right here, and we're gonna flush this thing out real quick. 210 amps, about 40 CFH argon. Okay, so the short steps are going to allow me to make sure I'm getting this thing burned in. All right, that's flush right there. This thing's cooking along real nice. Pun intended, this thing's getting super hot. If you guys notice, I've taken an old stick rod glove here that I had laying around in my bag. We went about 1/4 of the pipe when we used almost a full piece of 36 inch, 1/8 inch 70S6. So We're gonna go ahead and burn the rest of this up. Any of you guys that are in welding school, there's something that really bothers your welding instructors, and that's not fully utilizing your material. I'm cooking at 210 amps right now, and I'm gonna burn this thing down almost down to the numbers to make sure that I utilize my material the best that I can. When I fire up, I'm gonna fire up just a little bit above where I stopped. I'm gonna come back and reestablish my puddle and take off again. I know it may look like I'm resting the cup on the pipe, but really and truthfully, I touch it down on the left side to make my stop, but the rest of the time I'm just barely floating the cup just right above the surface of the pipe. So when I fire back up, when I really got that deep crater there, I really like to make sure that I dip that puddle all the way down in there and make sure that I've got it kind of preheated for when I start this. Because even though I'm running really hot, this pipe's really hot, you're still running a risk at trapping something down inside of here. So you always want to make sure you see that puddle land down in the bottom and tie in. You never want the front edge of the weld to look like it's rolling over or cold rolling. Even though it's really hot, you can still cold roll this material down in the very bottom of the groove. All right. So when I come up on this thing, I'm coming back around to the weld at where I first started. And what I'd really like to do is when I do get up here, I'm gonna poke that puddle kind of out in front of that weld. And I'm gonna make sure that it doesn't, because this is a big wall of weld right here, right? So I don't want to just run right into that big wall of weld, or I'm gonna leave a void down in here. So you'll notice when I get right up here, I'm gonna run that puddle way out in front of the tungsten. I'm gonna get that nice and liquid down there, and then I'll go ahead and backfill it in. Alright, so I'm coming up on that spot right now. Getting closer and closer. Hopefully I got enough wire to make it happen. Alright, so here's where I'm going to go ahead and poke that puddle out in front of that. Then I'm going to come back. Know that that's good and tied in down there. One thing you can keep to keep that from happening is when you start the fill, start a little narrower when you very first start, maybe almost kind of like a hot pass type width, so that when you do come back around, you've got almost a little bit of a ramp to kind of come up on there and keep from having to do that. When you do that, you really do put a lot of heat, and if you're not very experienced with this, if you haven't done it very much, you can really push that root in and end up having a big old dingleberry on the inside of that pipe. So we definitely don't want to do that. But this thing is about 10,000 degrees right now, hotter than the surface of the sun. This rig's about to cook my hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this thing cool down. We'll come back, we'll put a big glass cup on, and we're gonna cap this thing. All right guys, so got this flush, got it cooled off with the help of a fan. And we've got this number 15 ceramic cup on here. We're about to find out what this thing's made of. I don't know that we're gonna fall within the effective heat range of this thing, but we're gonna lay down a cap on this thing. I'm gonna be using the same exact technique, minus I'm gonna keep the wire engaged in the puddle, and I'm just gonna be pivoting off these 3 fingers right here. That's where all my stability comes from. I'm gripping the torch with these 2, and I'm using these 3 as stability. Really encourage you to, if you're doing this technique, make sure you've got some gloves that's got some insulation on the back side. I know these gloves that I just picked up got a good amount of insulation on the back side, so they help keep my hand from getting too heated up on this thing. But put the root in at 190, put the fill in at 210, 220, and now we're gonna go ahead and we're going to put the cap on at 170. I'm gonna see how it flows for the first 6 inches or so. We may need to turn the heat up just a little bit so that we get a good flow on here. That's one of the main things that you're gonna want when we're putting this cap on, is this thing to flow good. So here we go, let's fire up. Get this booger done. Seems to be flowing out pretty good. I'm basically just kind of running a little bit of a Laywire technique. I'm feeding a little bit in, but I'm more or less just kind of putting a little pressure on the wire, just kind of letting it fall through my fingers. The thing you're really going to want to watch on this is, like with all welding processes, we're watching the edges of the puddle, making sure they consume the beveled edge and don't leave it hanging out. Wire got stuck in the puddle there a little bit. That happens. Don't stress, don't freak out, just go back over there and re-melt it. Get it loose out of the puddle. And then come on back around on it. I'm feeling a little bit of stickiness in the wire in the puddle. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the amps up a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and crank it on up to about 185. I feel like I need about 15 more to make this work out the way I want. Oh yeah, I like that. That's feeling a lot smoother. Tell you what, this edge cup is really standing the test. There's a lot of amperage. I don't know that these were designed to cook at this amperage range. Started to lose a little bit of color. That's due to the heat in this thing. You don't always have to walk the cup to make your welds look pretty. This is a technique that can be learned over time. It's taken me a lot of years to perfect it. I haven't actually done it in a really long time. It's a really helpful technique, especially if you're in confined quarters. Can't really get your chicken wing in there to be flapping around inside the tube rack. This is a really good technique to use. Just want to thank the guys at WeldTube for giving me the opportunity to get out in front of you guys and show you a little bit of what I can do. Definitely not a person that really likes to show off their talents a whole lot, but I really do appreciate the time, and I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.